Okay, I guess we're ready to start. Once again, I'm going to introduce Sheila Klein and Richard Kram, and they'll decide who goes first. Um, each one of you try to speak about 20 minutes, and then we'll come together at the end, and then it's an opportunity for questions and for people to ask anything that they might have about work that they've done over the week, more ideas that they've had based upon last week's session. And, you know, it's all here to help you. So just there are no, in education we used to say there are no stupid questions. There are no stupid questions. So feel free to ask anything that you like. Okay, Sheila, Richard, take it away, please.
Okay, so I am going to speak first. I am Sheila Paris Klein, and I'm going to start with why I am. I'm just going to admit Judith because I'm right here, so I might as well do it. So I'm going to start with a little bit about my work career. I started out as a teacher and pretty soon switched to being the marketing vice president for several different hospitals. And I wound up in the last part of my career being the vice president for a conglomerate of hospitals and healthcare facilities in New Jersey. I did write because I always had to write in my job. And I have always written even as a child. And I guess that was one of, if people would ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up, it was either going to be a ballet dancer or a writer. So I managed one of them. I am now a writer. I was the editor of the literary magazine in my high school. And until I retired, I had written 2 novels which have never been published. So once I retired, I began to write seriously. However, I have a very sporadic view of writing. I write whenever I feel like it. And as someone much more famous than I once said, it took him 10 years to write the novel, 2 years of actual writing, and 8 years of drinking. Well, mine was not drinking, mine was eating chocolate. So,
What about the wine? What about the wine?
Oh, the wine, there is wine in that. There is.
I know that for a fact.
Exactly. I am a writer who starts with characters, which is why Richard and I are doing character development together. To me, the most important thing that I can do is to create a character. And I create the character in many, many different ways. One of the things that hangs in my office is this sign that says, "Careful or you'll end up in my novel." So I'm always attuned to myself, to people I know, to people I read about, to people I don't know but would like to know. And so I can make up who they are because they are not available for a conversation. I listen to people all the time. I ask questions all the time. I watch people all the time. I read about people all the time because that is where I'm going to get my inspiration. And I know it sounds very strange to start that way, but that is what makes me want to write. I think of a character, I think, well, this person would be really interesting. What are they going to do? And at some point, I create a story around them. And then I want to show you one of my guiding principles, which is main for your characters. You do everything you can to raise them right. And as soon as they hit the page, they do any damn thing they please. So I certainly have had instances where, as the creator of the character, I start a chapter with that character and discover that, unbeknownst to me, they have done or about to do something I do not approve of, and I would never have let them do. So it's just, it is, and I think everybody would say that about any creative process. At some point in the process, the character, the work of art, whatever you are doing begins to take over, and you are no longer the true author of who they are or what this work of art is going to be. People have said that about painting, about sculpting, about almost any activity where there's some discretion. And so, although I think I have all the discretion in the world, at some point, I no longer have that discretion. So I am what my colleague Richard Kram would say, I am what's called a pantster. And I'm going to turn it over to Richard for about 3 minutes so he can describe the different styles of writing. Richard, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Okay, so there are two main characters types that you always hear about. Pantser, which means right by the seat of your pants, and
Me.
plotters, who outline their work in great detail, or more, some more than others. And in reality, most of us are plansters, myself included, which means I'm about 70% pantser and 30% plotter. Just to give you some highlights, some of the most famous, or at least some famous pantsers, besides Sheila, who, by the way, I've worked with Sheila. She never writes down one thing while she's doing her novel. It's either in her head or it happens as she writes. So she's 95% pantser. She's an extreme. The other pantsers that you all know are Stephen King, George R.R. Martin, and Mark Twain. And some plotters that you know are J.K. Rowling and John Grisham. So I'll get back to that a little bit during development, but that's enough to fill out your point, Sheila. Go ahead.
So Richard is absolutely right. I don't outline. I don't create notes. I don't create background material. When I write, I sit down at some point in the day, and I am a person who writes late in the day. I like to start writing at about 4:30 in the afternoon, and I write until it's time for me to eat dinner. So usually there's a limiting factor there in terms of time. And I sit down and I start, and things just show up. I have a general idea of where I'm going after my characters exist already, and I try to get there. And if I don't get there, sometimes it's my failing, and sometimes it's because the character just will not do that anymore. I have written that person into the form that person is, and although I would love them to commit a murder, they ain't gonna do it. It's too late. I gotta find another murderer, or I have to recreate them. So I'd like to talk in general about characters, because it seems to me that as I read, I've been able to identify at least 4 different types of characters, women in most novels, and 3 different types of male characters. So I'd like to talk for a minute about that, and maybe give some insight into why some novels and some TV shows and some movies work really, really well, and why some don't. So I have these categories for women, and I call it the good, the bad, the vain, and the dumb. And I'll give you 2 examples that I think you would all know. In Sex and the City, Miranda, the lawyer, is the good. Carrie Bradshaw, the writer, is the bad. Samantha, the marketing person, is the vain. And Charlotte is the dumb. So if you know those characters and you think about it, I think you could feel that they all really fit into that very, very nicely. In the novel Little Women, so we're going back, way back to the 1860s. Meg, the oldest, is the good. Jo, the writer, is the bad. Amy is the vain, and Beth, the youngest, is the dumb. So if this helps at all, I think it's true for shows like Golden Girls, which I never really watched, but that is usually the situation in a show like Golden Girls or Designing Women. Whenever there are 4 women, they're kind of divided into roughly these stereotypic roles. It does work very well for situation comedy, and I think in the long run, it even works well for novels. And then there are the men. So the men are, so I created the concept of the good, the bad, the vain, and the dumb. However, there is a concept that's definitely afloat for men, and they are called cads, dads, and lads. And the first person to ever identified it for the men in Jane Austen novels. So this is how far back that kind of characterization goes. So I'm trying to think of novels. Well, one of the ones I can think of is Gone with the Wind, where Ashley is the dad, Rhett Butler is the cad, and all the other minor characters like the Charlton twins that Scarlett marries first are the lads. And the same is true for things for Sex and the City. I think Little Women does not really follow that trend exactly, but there are moments where it does. So if that, it may now help you when you think about novels you've read or shows these you've seen, to kind of think about how those archetypical types helped to move a story along. I don't follow true to form when I write that, but when I look back, sometimes I'm really close into that dividing line between those characters. What I'd like to say also about characters is that once you let them loose, you have to be prepared for them to do things that you didn't think they were going to do. And that's always very exciting. And I'd also like to add the fact that for me, location is also a character. And I think in many, many novels, location is a character. So it's location, it is a city, a river, a house. In the novel that I've just finished now called All Others Must Pay, it's a cabin. The location sometimes has its own characteristics which govern how a novel is going to progress. And certainly horror novels almost always have location as a main character. People are locked in a castle, or they're in a cave, or something horrible has happened to them, and they're in this confined area. And that confined area becomes a character in the novel. It could be an animal, it could be Moby Dick, which of course was a main character in the novel and had as his own personality given to him by the writer and the other characters in the novel. I'm trying to think of, I think that, so after I have found my characters, and as I said, sometimes it's me, sometimes it's somebody I read about, sometimes it's somebody I met, sometimes it's somebody I would like to meet, and I don't have a way to do that because they are historic or because they are they're just not available to me. That then I proceed to figure out who are they and what would they do. In my novel In the Cave of Memory, one of the main characters is based on a poem I read by another writer, and the poem was about a woman who could go to sleep in hotel beds and dream the dreams of other people who had slept in the bed before. And to me, the concept of a mystic is always very interesting. I actually don't know any mystics, so I created a mystic. Her name is Ave Maria, and she does what I think a mystic would do, but I'm not really sure. But that is the beauty of writing your own work. You can make that person do things that perhaps a real person of that ilk would not have done, but there you are the author of that. So I have used that kind of inspiration to create characters, to create stories. I was in Plymouth Plantation, which is a reenactment area, sort of like Williamsburg up in Massachusetts. And I saw a young woman portraying the young woman of the time. And I thought, I wonder if she chose to be that person because she resonated to that character, or whether she just walked in one day and they said, oh, you look like the right type for so-and-so, and you will now play the girl who does the weaving. But I decided that if she was the person who, for some reason, had a relationship to other lives, that this would be a character I wanted to write about. And I wrote an entire novel about characters who are time travelers and go from one situation to another situation in different centuries, in different locations, speaking different languages. It was quite an adventure for me. And it was all inspired by this young girl that I saw playing a part in Plymouth, Massachusetts, in a reenactment area. So I never know where my inspirations are going to come from. And I follow up on whatever seems interesting to me. Richard is absolutely right. I really don't take notes. I just move myself along. And eventually I get to the point where I figured out the plot. And from there, of course, it's much easier to move the characters into whatever situation they need to be in. I also, in terms of character description, which Richard is going to discuss at length, I tend to describe my characters through the views of other people, or I let my characters express themselves through conversation. And sometimes I don't know who a character is until they have a conversation. So just to like get us started, I figured I would read from one of my novels, In the Cave of Memory, which is, by the way, shameless promotion, available on Amazon. And this is about a wife who was looking at her husband, whom she's been married to for many, many years. Her name is Agnes, his name is Ted. She realized for the first time how much Ted had aged in that year, how much energy he had lost. His face had collapsed and lost the last signs of freshness and eagerness and youth. How his jaw had slackened and his chin had receded, and how he had made an effort to keep his mouth closed to cover his crooked front teeth. Once in their whiteness, they were endearing. They were a sign of carelessness, a sense of life, of a willingness to be rough and unpolished, because there was much to do for those who were smart and gifted and didn't have time to cultivate good looks. Now, yellowed from cigarette smoke, they were unappealing. Ted had lost weight. More than weight, he had lost density. His shoulders curved inward, framing a hollow chest. His hands dangled at his sides without purpose. His gait was hesitant. He walked, she realized, with his knees bent, as if the mass of his own body, slight as it was too great a burden. So what I have done is describe Ted after a family tragedy as he aged, not by me, the author, describing him, but by how he looked to Agnes, his wife. And the other example I can give, and I'm giving examples from my own writing so I can better explain how I did it, why I did it, and what made it happen for me. The other is a conversation that two people who know each other only from work have. One of the men has suffered a setback emotionally and has decided not to come back to work. And the other man shows up at his apartment to convince him he has to come back to work. So the first man says, "Come back." "I can't." "You can't?" "I prefer not to." "I don't know what that means." "I prefer not to." "What are you, Bartleby the Scrivener or something?" "Oh, you think I never read anything? Junior English, Sister Brody. I got 610 on my language SAT, 730 on my math. Accepted at Fordham, you douchebag." "I still have some soup left." "I ate. Let's not confuse this with a social call or a shiva call, because that's what you look like. No shoes, no shave, all the mirrors covered. Hey, remember that mikveh we built in Brooklyn, the one with the yellow brick? I think there are people still down there." He's now talking about a car that went over the George Washington Bridge. And he says, "I think there are people still down there." "That's not what the police think. They pulled up only one car and it was empty, so the people must have gotten out. They were trapped. They washed down the river. People were reported missing. In a car with the windows still closed? You are making stuff up. And the police got calls from 42 families. You think 42 people went over the side of that bridge and they were all in one car? War wonton, lots of shrimp left. So turn yourself into the cops. You feel so guilty. I called them. They said they'd get back to me. Of course, because you have just become one of the psychos who call every time there's a murder or a missing kid or a bus crash. My brother says the 71st in Brooklyn gets 5 calls a day from psychos who confess. How do the police know they're all crazy? Maybe they are guilty. Guilty of the Preppy murder? Guilty of Lisa Steinberg, of stabbing Kitty Genovese? I'll eat the soup if you put your shoes on. Is it still hot? And none of that green stuff, just the shrimp. Don't bother to shave. Well, maybe you should. And shower also. You smell. So this is the character that I had introduced just by conversation when he shows up at his colleague's house to convince him to go back to work. By the way, he does go back to work. And that's how I know who that character is, because I started him in conversation. One of the attributes I have, good, bad, or indifferent, is that I have almost total auditory recall. There are people who have photographic memories. I don't have one of those. I have an auditory memory that is really pretty good. And when I hear a conversation, I can hold on to it for years and get it back pretty much verbatim, or at least get the sense of it back. And so that's very helpful to me as a writer. But of course, everybody has a different skill. Some people are very visually oriented. Some people have auditory skills. Some people are very tactile. And so I think there's a way to incorporate whatever is your skill into how you create a character and how you move forward with that character. And I also think that sometimes you can define a character in just the fewest of words. I'm just checking the time. I seem to be good. Even a one, huh?
4 minutes, please.
Okay. So even a one-liner can say so much. And one of my favorite one-liners is from the movie When Harry Met Sally. And it's not the line you're thinking of. It's a line he uses to describe Sally. Harry uses this to say about Sally: she was the worst kind of woman, a high maintenance woman who thinks she's low maintenance. And to me, that says just, it's perfection. It just is perfection. And of course, even like the opening line from Moby Dick, call me Ishmael. If you know who the biblical Ishmael is, you know this character is in for a rough ride, just by that opening line. So one other footnote before I turn it over to Richard: I am a lazy writer. I write sporadically, and as that person said, it takes me 10 years to write a novel because I'm only writing for 2 years, but I'm fooling around doing anything else I can think of to escape writing for the rest of the time. I don't believe, by the way, I don't believe in writer's block. And I will say this: if you were to decide to write, let's say for 2 months or a month straight, and every day you sat down to write, some days you would feel totally in control. You would be in flow. Every word would just march out of your mouth to its own rhythm. And some days you will be pulling teeth and it will be difficult to write 3 sentences. But a month later, when you go back to read your work, you cannot tell the difference between the words that you wrote that came out of you like magic and the words you had to pull out like teeth that were stuck. So I'm going to turn it over to Richard, and if he needs anything from me, he will call on me. Richard, your turn.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I write under my full name, Richard Stephen Kram, and just give you a real quick background for a reason. 45 years ago, my undergraduate degrees are in math and electrical engineering, graduate degree in neuropsychology. So I spent my life in the tech world as a scientist, and I didn't write except for in college. I wrote some poems and I had some ideas for the book. My last English class was 49 years ago, freshman English, which I hated, except for that they made me read Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, which was one of my favorite books. So my point here is that many backgrounds, you can come from many backgrounds and become a good writer. You don't have to be one of those people who have written a lot already or have dreamed of being a writer. I just use my own example and other people I've met that come from different backgrounds and end up doing some writing. So I'm going to start with just a few character traits. There are, easily 20 that you'll get in lists. If you want to Google them or something, you'll get 5. But these are the ones I like. Establish the character's goals and motivations. Give the character an external and internal conflict. Make sure your character has both strengths and flaws. Decide whether your character is going to be a reliable narrator or an unreliable narrator. So some characters will lie on purpose, and other characters just can't get it right. So you can't believe everything that they say. And you make that decision as you go along. Give the characters a past. In my second book, the main character, Jack, his past is my past. So I started with me because I know me. So I gave him that pass. Then you can get into some physical characteristics. And I do, on an aside here, I like to kill one of my characters, at least, if not more, during my books, because you will find that your main characters who don't die their reaction to that death is just a superb way to inform the reader what kind of person that they are. So those are just some simple things. And don't forget your antagonist, by the way. The antagonist, in a lot of ways, is going to shape your work more than the main characters. So definitely spend some time thinking about your antagonist. Now, I said I was a plotter and a pantser because when I found out, I started off being total pantser like Sheila, and then I found that I had ideas. So it was very important to me to just write them longhand in no particular order, just as they came to me. And I would put this aside. So my three things in writing were writing, jotting ideas into my notebook, or doing research. Those were the three big prongs that moved me along in the writing. And next, I'd like to show you, so that's what makes me a little bit of a plotter. Although, like I said, there's no outline, it's not in any particular order, but it has ideas that I may want to use. By the way, of that particular book, 40% got into the novel. So, it's definitely just ideas and thoughts. I'm going to hold up one of many. You can find so many of these. This is called a character profile. And if you go to the web, you'll find easily more than 36 of these, and you can pick what you want. What I certainly like about this one is it says, my character loves, my character hates, my character's greatest fear is, in the future, my character hopes to. So rather than just the siblings and what city they grew up in, whatever, this one had a lot more insight into the character, and I like that. Now, as it turns out, as mostly a pantser, I've never used one of those forms, but I have done a lot of what's on them in my notebooks. And in particular, to me, the motives and goals, both short-term and long-term meaning the novel or even beyond, and the conflicts are some of the most important parts to me that'll help me develop the character. So I lean on those, and I do tend to write them down, not before I start the book, maybe a few. I did on my second book, I had a few ideas of who the character was going to be, but as it develops and I start to realize that, and then I start filling them out in more form in my notebook and in my mind, and then they come to life. I want to give you an example of doing the physical characteristics, two examples that are quite different. This is from my novel, A Time Witch. Just a couple sentences here. This is chapter 3. The year is 2166. In this novel, you have characters from before an asteroid hits the Earth in 2047, starting in 1980, and then these people beyond in 2166, both trying to stop the tragedy. A scowl crosses Ed Wickstrom's rugged face. At the moment, his high forehead is deeply furrowed below a straight hairline, further accentuating his deep-set eyes of stony gray. A flat nose rests over pursed lips and a prominent jaw. So here, you're getting the physical characteristics in one clump. I'm going to talk about POV in a minute, and I'll use an example from, I won't read it, but I'll just tell you about an example from Divergent, because I wrote, my second book is YA, so I have a lot of YA. But in this novel, which is not YA, here is In the middle of a chapter, my main characters are meeting someone who's a secondary character. And here's how they describe her, and it's not in one fell swoop. Evelyn Goldman is a professor of chemical engineering. Spring classes have concluded and the students are studying for finals. We knock and enters Evelyn's office. She sits at her desk, takes off her round eyeglasses and looks up. What can I do for you? Her thin mouth frames the question. In the next paragraph, there's some words, and then her piercing sienna eyes say, get on with it. And basically, as you skip through the next 5 or 6 paragraphs, piece by piece, you're going to find different parts of what she physically looks like. Her inverted triangle stamped face is stamped with astonishment in one place. Her ash brown hair spills along in another place. And personally, I think spreading the physical characteristics out is an easier and more subtle and fun way to do it. I think Ed's works because it's very short. He is the penultimate character in the people from the future trying to save the earth. And it's the very introduction to that time. So it's the first thing you start with. It's not so bad to give him his physical characters. By the way, when I did Ed, I was thinking of Ed Harris a little bit, especially his role in Apollo 13. And that idea helped guide me in the development of his character. So another thing that's important, if you put your character on your cover, and here's the cover of my first book, is you've already started to develop the character. She is poised, confident, aloof. And here on the back, where we start showing some of her tattoos that she'll get, she's sexy. So right from the cover, poised, confident, aloof, sexy. Now, I was definitely going for captivating as well as I thought of my cover. So your cover can introduce some of your characters depending on whether they're there or not. So now I want to talk about POV. In this book, Ayana, the title character, Ayana Time Witch, you never get inside her head because the character Jack, that she and Jack go and do most of the adventures along the book, are always told from Jack's first person present tense point of view. So what you get to develop her is her dialogue, her actions, what Jack is thinking about her or how he sees her. And the one that's missing, because this POV doesn't let you get into her head, is inner thoughts and emotions, which are also a very good way to build your character. But in this book, I wanted her to continue to be mysterious and enigmatic. You have no idea. She arises with no memory, not even her name. And one of the things in the book is, who is she and why is she there? So I wanted to stay out of her head. If I got into her head, you would know too much about the character and spoil the whole book, so to speak. So actions, dialogue, inner thoughts and emotions, and how others, as Sheila was pointing out, see and think about the characters are 4 big ways that you use to develop your character. I'm going to do a little bit of dialogue from Catcher in the Rye. This is where Caulfield has gone to visit one of his instructors after he has decided to drop out. And he says, "Look, sir, don't worry about me," I said. "I mean it, I'll be all right. I'm just going through a phase right now. Everybody goes through phases and all, don't they?" "I don't know, boy, I don't know." I hate it when somebody answers that way. Sure they do," I said. "I mean it, sir. Please don't worry about me." I sort of put my hand on his shoulder. "Okay," I said. Wouldn't you like a cup of hot chocolate before you go? Mrs. Spencer would be interrupted. I would, I really would. But the thing is, I have to get going. I have to go right to the gym. Thanks enough. Thanks a lot, sir. Then we shook hands and all that crap. It made me feel sad as hell, though. I'll drop you a line, sir. Take care of your grip now. Goodbye, boy. And as I shut the door and started back to the living room, he yelled something at me, and I couldn't exactly hear him. I'm pretty sure he yelled, "Good luck," at me. I hope not. I hope to hell not. I never yelled good luck at anybody. It sounds terrible when you think about it. And here's thinking of, especially of that last part, such a subtle insight into Holden Caulfield that good luck to him implies there's failure potential. So he's thinking of the failure, not the, I'm going to be in your corner and do good and anything like that. So both directly in some of his dialogue and his inner thoughts, some of that was not dialogue, you get to see him. And of course, if you've read it, he's like that throughout the book. But I like that one particular example of a very subtle way. Good luck. You probably just read through it and didn't think about it, but somewhere in your subconscious, it came this idea that he hates the idea of someone saying good luck. So I think that's good. I think another dialogue that I'm going to give you is from my second book. And basically the three people are 16 years old. This is a YA novel, young adult, and they've just killed 4 Draugrs, which are horrible creatures. And this is afterwards. Iniquity quipped, "If you two were any noisier back there, you could have awoken a sleeping troll. And if you were any worse with the blade, we would all have been skinned alive." Julian flashed a nasty grin. Jalame joined in. "My father warned me about depending on the likes of you two. Clods, spazzes, fraud under my sandals." This from Princess Iniquity. Julian didn't understand, but howled just the same. "Slackers, dickwads, asswipes." They all broke out in bellowing laughter, driving them to tears, not knowing they were expelling the fear that had gripped them. They continued to snicker until Iniquity started to hiccup. That brought the boys to laughter again. After a stern look from Iniquity, they eventually reined it in. A couple things here. In this book, where Julian, who's from Earth, falls into this fantasy world of Edrum, where there's a battle between good and evil and a lot of real fighting and death, the 16-year-olds, although there's a lot of banter that shows that their age, they are more serious than our Earth counterparts because they know about battle. They've seen the dead, their cousins, their brothers, their aunts. So this was another nice chance, including banter, to just have them show that level of character in terms of their age was. And I also wanted to note that if you'll notice with clods and spazzes and slackers and dickwads and asswipes, I have no tags. And there are 3 people. And the point is, it doesn't matter who's talking. I don't have to tell you Jalame said this and Iniquity said that and I said this, because it doesn't really matter. Sheila uses this technique a lot as well too, when there's this conversation where everybody's talking and it doesn't really matter which character says what. You're getting the idea anyway. I think Sheila has a good example that you can look up on the internet of some real good dialogues that
Yes.
develop character.
Yes, I do. And I will try to type them into the chat. There's a story by Ernest Hemingway called Hills Like White Elephants, where all of the character development is done through dialogue. And what is even more interesting is that the people are only tangentially talking about the real issue between them. So it's probably about five pages long. So I would certainly recommend that. And I would also recommend chapter 2 of Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, where a couple goes through an entire conversation in which the wife convinces the husband not to give his half-sisters the money that he thinks he owes them. And it is so subtle and so finely wrought that she takes him from a position where he wants to give away about a third of his fortune to the position where he's only going to be sending them cakes and game from his land every so often. So it's just, and it's all done in conversation. So I will type these into the
You know what?
into the
Excuse me,
chats.
Sheila, can I suggest that you put it in an email and we'll forward it out instead of, because the chat's going to disappear.
Sure, I can do that. And I can also say both of them are available if you Google them through wherever you like to find your information. They are
Good.
both available full word count for free.
Okay, great,
So because they're in the public domain.
great.
So you don't have to buy the books.
Yeah, you don't, you can just get them on your computer. It's easy.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to give an example of what's not in my novels, the inner thoughts idea, because of the way the point of views that I chose. But here's something from Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. You may have read this. This is one of my favorite novels in the last 5 years. She writes incredibly. And here she's giving you some inner idea of the character Amy, the wife. What's happening is she's talking about her parents, and her parents want her to get married. And they start off with saying, well, we all know there's no one left. And this is her thoughts, no one good left. And I know that they secretly think there's something wrong with me, something hidden away that makes me unsatisfiable. The ones who are not soulmated, the ones who have settled, are even more dismissive of my singleness. It's not hard to find someone to marry, they say. No relationship is perfect, they say. They, who make do with dutiful sex and gassy bedtime rituals, who settle for tedious conversation, who believe that husbandly capitulation, yes, honey, okay, honey, is the same as concord. He's doing what you tell him to do because he doesn't care enough to argue, I think. Your petty demands simply make him feel superior or resentful, and someday he will F his pretty young coworker who asks nothing of him, and you will actually be shocked. Give me a man with a little fight within him and some more. So don't forget that probably in a lot of your work, there will be sections where you are diving into the thoughts of the character. And if you do it in an omniscient point of view, omni, where it's a godlike view, that the narrator knows all characters, knows the future, knows the past. He can go into anybody's head and tell you what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And one guideline, a current guideline, and probably was pretty true before, is that if you're writing in Omni and you want to do different POVs, it's often good to do them in chapters. A chapter from somebody's point of view, then a chapter from somebody else, rather than jumping, it's called hopping heads, right inside a particular dialogue. So, well, I wanted to wrap up with something that certainly has to do with character, but has to do with all of writing. It's a quote from Picasso, and it says, learn the rules like a pro so that you can break them as an artist. So this is, I think, when I do my classes and even when I'm just doing critiquing, it's such an important point. You are the author. You want to do things as you see them. Sometimes cadence and rhythm and flow of the dialogue or the descriptions are as important as the words themselves. So you may not use normal grammatically correct sentence structures because it doesn't fit in the cadence and flow that you want. I'll give you an example of passive, also from Gone Girl. You're not supposed to, especially in today's world, if you go to critique groups and stuff, they will find sometimes when you use the word was, not all the time, because some of it's fine, but they will say, oh, that's passive. You should try to make it an active verb. Here in Gone Girl, I'll just start off. Today was not a day for second guessing or regret. It was a day for doing. Downstairs, I could hear the return of a long lost sound, Amy making breakfast. Banging wooden cupboards, rump thump, rattling containers of tin and glass, ding ring, shuffling and sorting a collection of metal pots and iron pans, Ruz shudds. A culinary orchestra tuning up, clattering vigorously toward the finale, a cake pan drum rolling along the floor, hitting the wall with a cymbalic crash. Something impressive was being created, probably a crepe, because crepes are special, and today Amy would want to cook something special. End paragraph, a single line paragraph. It was our 5th anniversary. Well, you can't get simpler and more direct than that. And there's no way I can think of something better than using the was to get this punchy line across easily. In fact, the whole use of passive verbs depends upon your reader as well. My ideas in terms of how much passive I felt was fine was different when writing young adult, because passive is easier to read. And when you write for young adult, you want the read to be an easy read. You know, and then Ayana doesn't have nearly as many was. I think I did a search, and in 105,000 words, there are less than 1,000 was in the whole book. So don't be fooled. It'll depend on who your audience is as well. I also want to just bring up one of my favorite new genres. It's called the fictional autobiography. And two of the most famous fictional autobiographies are Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury and Catcher in the Rye. Catcher in the Rye is a fictional autobiography. And I know a lot of people, when they first write, are writing either sections, short stories, or full memoirs, and they try to get everything as factual as possible. Now, the truth is, if you haven't written contemporaneously notes and have photographs, every time you go for a memory, you create that memory. Our minds are not VHS tapes, somewhat degraded, that you get pieces of memory. They're context driven. Even when you form the memory, your biases, the context, the people around you, what you're feeling, your current emotions, shades how you remember some portion of that event that's going on. And later, when you recall it, it is recreated. That's the way your brain works. Remember, I have neuropsychology in my schooling. It's created. It's not retrieved. And so I would suggest, or at least let you think about, if you're doing a memoir or if you're doing short stories that you certainly want your family to read, to understand their history, and that's super. You also want them to read it and not just take the first couple lines and then, oh, this is so boring and dull, I'm just going to lay it down. So you might think of fictionalizing it a little bit. It's still the main story with the facts that you want to present, but you do it realizing that there is no truth and that you can spice it up by developing it in a fictional manner, fictional autobiography. So that's what we have, Lynn, and we're open to questions.
I just wanted to add one thing, which is that there's a writing exercise that begins in November. It's called Nanowrimo. It is National Novel Writing Month. But of course, you don't need to write a novel. You can write anything of your choosing. when you commit to writing about 1,500 words a day. And you'd be surprised how far you can get, because by the end of the month, you have to have written 50,000 words. If you look it up, it's NANOWRIMO.org. And I will put it on chat and then send it to Neil. And I'm going to do it this month, starting in November, because I need to finish the novel I'm working on. And I recommend it to all of you.
Oh, yes. In terms of recommendations, before I hand it over to Lynn, join a writer's group is my advice. You need to have other eyes on your work besides your better half or even just yourself, depending. The more people who see it, and most of these critiques that are done from the point of view of the reader. When I hold my class at Ollie, which Lynn was a part of, I totally emphasize, we're not talking about you as a writer making comments, but it's just as a reader, what made sense, what didn't make sense, what was awkward, what was out of character, and so having other people's look at your work, and even if you're reading them like most of these places, like I go weekly and I get 1,500 words a week at Henderson Writers Group. But going through my novel at 1,500 words at a time, I'm getting huge ideas. I've changed major areas, especially you would do much better doing this in dialogue than in stale narration. So I really recommend joining a writing group and getting feedback from fresh eyes. All right.
So I could say from personal experience, first of all, thank you both. You so full of great ideas. I wrote 2 pages, and I will, if you'd like, I'm gonna type it up, or I'll put it in an email and I'll send it out to Neil and he can forward it to everybody. I jotted down as fast and as well as I could, so it may not be complete, but you'll have a little skeleton. The part that Richard just said about being in a writer's group, I had never done that until I was in his Ollie class, and I think I did 3 semesters of it for my first book for the 50 States, 50 Stories. And I got such valuable information, because people listen to it as a reader, and also with the limited or extended expertise that they might have in terms of being a writer, and things that you don't think about come out, and the ideas are really rich, and it's a very safe environment. I never once felt put upon, and believe me, there was plenty of criticism about my writing, but it was done with care and with gentleness, and it was a community. That's the best way that I can describe it. So I would definitely, it doesn't have to be Ollie, although that's certainly a wonderful vehicle, certainly to get started with. And I think you're still on Zoom, or you're in person, Richard?
This semester I'm in person. Next semester I'm back on Zoom.
Okay, so when you say next semester, you're talking about for the spring.
Spring.
Yeah. Okay, so either way, when we did it on Zoom, we sent Richard the sample of our writing, and it came out to about every 3rd session. Each one of us got to display our reading, sent it out to him. He sent it out to the group. We read the excerpts beforehand, and then one by one, there were usually five in a class, 5 samples in a session of an hour and a half, and we each responded to it on Zoom. We had it in front of us. We marked it up if we wanted to. We had questions. We had things we wanted to share, to further understand, and it was really a very worthwhile thing to do. So I would definitely encourage you to do some type of writing group, or even have like a writing partner, like a study partner in school, to have a writing partner, somebody who has some type of interest / expertise / experience that can push you along a little bit.
Let
All
me
right.
jump in for a second here, Lynn. So right now we're talking about larger groups as critique and comments. I like to think of them as comment groups. It's also nice and could be very useful to have a very small group, 3 or 4 people whom you feel are similar to you in terms of, like in my case, they write speculative fiction. Sorry, I got a feedback, I guess, somewhere. But the Sheila, for example, is in my group, and 2 other women, one who writes horror, one who writes fantasy. They're all excellent critiquers. Took me a year and a half to find a couple people that I felt that if I spent 5 hours once a month with them, we could go over entire novels and be beta readers. So I encourage you finding that study partner / small critique group.
All right.
How do you go about finding a group that suits what particular venue you're doing, you know? I mean, if it's not, like I'm attempting to do like a fable, which is an idea that I have. It has nothing to do with, I mean, the brilliant writing that you guys are doing. You know, so I'm not sure what type of a support group to be involved with.
Well,
I would say join a class. You can join a class at Ollie. And in fact, you can join online. I'll be back with Richard online. That is in every single case where I've been in a writers group, which is my 3rd time. I was in one in New Jersey, I was in one in California, and I was in one here. I found my fellow writers through the class that I took. So it's worth it to join the class and get the full experience of maybe 10, 15 people in order to see if there's a couple there that really resonate to you and you resonate to them.
You know, Judith, I was going to say in answer to your question, it just hit me. Perhaps you could just put a simple thing out on Facebook or on Instagram about the type of writing that you want to do. And is there anybody that would, that would like to share the experience with you? Somebody who could be a partner. See what you get. I mean, there are so many writing groups out there, the Coffee House Writers, a whole bunch of them. If you do the hashtag and you put in writers, you get more than you know what to do with. But on a smaller scale, maybe just throwing something out on Facebook and seeing what happens. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, no, that's a good suggestion.
yeah, in Ollie, we have people doing memoirs, people doing science fiction, people doing fantasy. Your fable would fit right in.
Exactly.
So
Okay.
it's different.
And Sheila Taube is somebody who would be able to help.
Right.
Right, she does fables.
So the idea of this is the question that I had for those of you who are thinking about writing. I know 2 or 3 of you mentioned that you think you might start writing, or you have an idea about some kind of a memoir. What questions do you have with the vis-a-vis the idea that you have and the breadth of characterization that we got this morning in the hour that both Sheila and Richard spoke? Can they help you? I mean, I jotted down a lot of things for myself. I laughed about the killing off somebody in a novel. I never would have thought about that. But in my particular, the second book that I'm writing, the Thelma and Lou book, I don't know about killing somebody.
I was gonna kill him.
But somebody could die. Somebody could die. It doesn't have to be killing somebody, right, Richard? Somebody could
Right.
die. And then the
Right.
reaction, it could be a natural death. And the reaction of the son, the daughter, the boyfriend, the husband, whatever tertiary relationship there is, the emotions and the memories that come out. I mean, it's like a panoply of things that can come out because somebody is gone. It happens it happens to all of us when somebody passes that we knew. What do? I just saw them. I just spoke to them. Just last month we had dinner. I went to college with her. She was such a this, he was such a that. I mean, all those memories come out, and the memories can be as a result of the person dying. So I just never would have thought about that myself.
Yeah, and it's both, you can both hit the emotional side, like in the second book, Battle Under the Many Colored Moons. Jalame, who becomes Julian's best friend in this fantasy world where the entire novel takes place, dies near the end. And it is transformational for Julian. It changes his whole outlook of how he might fit in with this group of 12 character types and creatures that inhabit this world. Or in the case of my first novel, it was a secondary character who died, and you had the emotions, but most important in that one, they go back in time to try to save him. So it gets woven into the fabric of fate and free will and what you can do and what you can't in time travel. So it was part of the plot that was very important.
Or in real life, what you should have said, what you should have done. Oh, I don't have that opportunity anymore. I never closed that up. I never solved that problem. I never. I mean, if you're in the middle of an argument, we never, we stopped talking. I mean, all the things that I'm just thinking now. All the things that come out with a death. Just something I had never thought about. But I want to hear from Katie. I want to hear from Starlin. I want to hear from Joy, and I want to hear from Sharon. All of you have expressed the idea that you would like to do some type of memoir, and I'm wondering if you gleaned anything that you could share with us about this, the character development, and what the idea that you have, and has it helped you?
Well, since you mentioned my name, I'll express my opinion, not opinion, but my circumstances are such that I have never attempted to write fiction. So a lot of this is irrelevant. I was delighted to see Joanne say that she will deal with creative nonfiction. Mm-hmm. I do participate in a writers group, and we have been together for almost 12 years. We met through a class that was organized at JCC, just several people that were interested, and our instructor or our guide through the whole thing stayed with us, and we became a cohesive, functioning group, even though many of the people changed through the years. In the past 5 years, we've been 8 people, 7, of such diverse backgrounds that we contribute so much to everyone's knowledge. I don't know about how much we've contributed to the writing, but we all continue to write as the primary motivation for our group to stay together. And COVID has presented problems, but whatever, we value each other and respect each other with totally different writing ability and narrative ability and whatever. It's just a smooth operation. That's all I can say. And we continue to write because we have a responsibility to each other, and that's the motivation there.
It sounds like a safe environment, which is something that I spoke about before. When you feel you can share your work. I did it when I did the first run through on the manuscript on the second book that I'm working on now with my book club. Joanne was there, Sheila was there, Judith was there, and I was a little nervous. I have to admit I was a little nervous, but basically I trust these women, and I trust. I felt it was a very safe environment, and the things that came out were really ideas. It wasn't like, this is really a piece of trash. I can't believe you're going to publish this. It was safe for me. People had nice things to say. People had suggestions, and it was safe. That's the word that I can use. Yeah. And I think that's very important. If you go someplace and you feel like, oh my God, these people are in a whole different league than I am, and I'm going to feel like I'm in kindergarten. That's not really going to help your self-image. So, you have to trust the people, I guess. I know you have to trust the people. But going back to my original question, the other three of you who are thinking about writing memoirs, was there anything that came through that you would like to ask these two experts about character development and things that you were thinking about doing? Starlin, please.
You're on mute.
Unmute yourself.
Am I
There you
good?
go. There you go. Yep, you did it. Please.
I think this changed like my whole approach. My whole approach was doing the memoirs, but I feel like everyone needs to tell their own story. And people in my case are very hesitant about telling their story. And sometimes maybe coming from a fiction standpoint where like something hit, like where you really rewrite the memories, because I've done that a lot. And I feel like that night was just part of the story. So much was from before. And what people don't know is a whole culture emerged out of this and within the survivor world. And when they were talking about character development, I saw the vein, I saw the bad, like these stories, but telling it from my perspective and not theirs, you know. And then the internal conflict like hit me like I lost my daughter. And that's been my conflict the whole time. I lost my baby girl in the middle of all this. And I mean, and just the conflict that I still struggle with, you know, that's my story. And I even wrote last night, actually this morning, I wrote in my head last night, and I do my homework, but
That's really,
yeah,
and you didn't, and you didn't throw it away.
I didn't throw it away. I have like this journal one of my students gave me like from a gift that was in a basket. So I had a journal. So I kept it, and I promised myself I wouldn't write about that night, but it very much is about that night. But it's not the gore. Like I said, I blocked my memories. Like I don't remember that. I just remember being on the phone with my husband and him having to get off the phone with me because my daughter was on the other line, and that's how I knew she was still alive. Was that moment, was when I had to get off the phone with him. And he's like, baby, get out of there, but I got to answer, it's your daughter. And I remember the fear of not hearing from him again, but then knowing she was, and my mom was probably still alive. So that's kind of what I wrote about last night.
Well, that's the beginning of your journey, and just what you said in the beginning about writing the characters through your point of view. That's, you know, that's another
Right.
technique. It's another technique. That's really great. That's like a big breakthrough. I
It was.
feel good about that. Not
Mhm.
about what happened, but good about that. Katie, what about you?
Starlin, thank you for sharing with us. I feel very honored and humbled that I feel honored and humbled that with everyone who shares, and particularly you, Starlin. So thank you. I was very relieved and inspired to hear about the concept of the, you know, fictional memoir. That really opened up a whole world to me. So my mind's kind of exploding there. So I feel more freedom now. I'd like to do sort of a memoir, but like we were talking last week about, there's certain things I'm not sure how to write about, or whether I want to include the fullness of it or whatever, and how to make the arc. So now that I understand the concept of fictionalizing it, well, you can just, you know, it just opens up all sorts of possibilities. So I'm just really excited now. I've got a lot of ideas going on.
That's great. I would say Sheila would not say this. I would say write them down. I would say write them down.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Cards and just, you know, just as you have these ideas, just put them down, and you just never know where those ideas are going to go. You just never
Okay.
know. So that's really very good. That's really
Okay.
very
Cool.
Sharon, you also had an idea about a memoir from your parents from World War II, and that love story. How did this session today resonate with you, please?
Just to give you a little bit of background, the writing classes that I was involved with before, I actually tried to do my own memoir. And quite frankly, was overwhelmed. And then the older you get and the more the stories expand, it's like, you know, I don't want to turn this into a 5,000 page manuscript. So the whole idea of doing the love story between my mother and father really gave me a focus, and took away the overwhelming feeling of you know, this big, huge project. With that being said, and Jade and I had talked a little bit about this, but what I'm finding is that not only is there a love story there, but you have to understand that during my mother and father's life, during them growing up and then meeting each other and then the war, there were three major events going on in this country. There was the Depression, which was overwhelming to everyone. And I, again, am blessed with stories that were told to me by my grandmother and my mother and my aunt. There was Prohibition, which actually directly affected my father's life in Atlantic City. And then after the two of them got together, obviously they were faced 6 months after they were married, they were faced with my father going off to war. So it's interesting to me, and as a result of today's class, I'm realizing that these other three things are also characters, because they're such a huge part of what went on with my mother and father separately until they met, and then what happened. And so it just, I guess my question is it best to include more? And then if it turns out that it's overwhelming, go back and remove some of it? Where do you begin to draw the line?
I would say that you first of all, before I answer that, as you're speaking, I'm thinking to myself, I wrote down Prohibition, Depression, and the war. I see your story divided into three sections.
Right.
And I see this love story going through the Depression, going through Prohibition and the war. Very definite times in history, very interesting differences in what everybody must have gone through. But that's if it were me, and listening to what you're saying, if it were me, I would have a notebook and I would divide it into three sections, and I start writing with the ideas of what the story was in each section. And I would write, I think you're right. And then I think you can always expand, you can always cut back. But the thing is, if you have something to say, just say it, and don't worry about the grammar. Don't worry about how, if the right tenses. Just get the ideas out, and then you'll look at the ideas in a block. Maybe you'll put them in three different sections, physically, three different colors, if you're a visual person, and go from there. And I think one of the things I want to pick up on with what Sheila said, I thought it was so, as a teacher, I taught for 25 years. I was administrative for 25 years. The idea of go with your strength. She's got a great auditory memory. Maybe somebody's got a great visual memory. Maybe somebody's very tactile and incorporates that in some way about what they're doing. Whatever your strength is in terms of putting this together, utilize that strength. If it's, well, they told me these stories, I remember these stories, good, get them down. Get them
Right.
down. There could be each section could have 4 or 5 or 6, depending upon how expanded or contracted it is, 4 or 5 or 6 sections, stories about the depression in your parents, about the prohibition in your parents, about the war in your parents. And through all that, you're weaving the story together, but it's not really a linear beginning and ending. It's really divided into sections. That's just listening to you. That's just what came to me.
Okay.
I'd like
Sandra?
I'd like to add one thing apropos of that, that there is one woman in our group who has spent these 12 years writing about one incident. Her father was in a plane. He was a radio man in a plane that was shot down by the Japanese prior to the bombing of following Pearl Harbor and prior to the atomic bomb. And she has spent all of this time interviewing people who had some connection to that. She has been writing about that one thing and keeping us apprised of her work. And it's absolutely fascinating. So as compared to taking this whole lifetime experience and dividing it into several sections, it was possible to write about just one thing and how all of these other people related to that experience. Just fascinating what she has done.
Judith, you want to say something?
I do.
Yeah.
I'm just curious about, I think that the 3 elements that you said, Lynn, of course, you've got to, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you- okay.
Yeah.
It's a little,
I just think also that people change, the three, nobody stays the same. But when you experience these 3 separate eras or 3 separate, tragedies that happened in their American life and how they first met, and then how all these experiences and what they were all about changed them. They stayed obviously constant with each other because here you are to tell the story. But, the idea how these incidences change people. I mean, people don't stay the same. They become different, different people, maybe with just more knowledge, more sensitivity, more something, but they do not stay on the same path. And of course, Joanne would be much better to direct you in that, but that's just kind of what I saw, which would be kind of interesting.
and that's probably a more interesting arc to follow, Sharon, how these 3 incidents made them, changed them, created them, for lack of a better arc.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Thoughts? Joanne, would you like to say something? I saw a lot of smiling and a lot of nodding. It was wonderful. You have anything you'd like to add to this great discussion?
Thank you so much. Before I lose my train of thought, baby boomer brain, Starlyn, from what I understood, your writing goal is to write about coping with the aftermath. Is that correct? What about creating a fictional support group with several of your people in that support group telling the real story, but within that fictional environment? That way you can create a back and forth between the people, as well as showing how they are coping. That might be a trajectory that works for you, and or not, but it might give you another idea for how to approach it that isn't so factual, journalistic. This happened, then this happened, I did this, I did that. So give that some thought. Thank you for asking. I want to just kind of transition by saying, with all of the fiction stuff that we got today, it can almost all apply to nonfiction, and it applies to each of us in real life. Even Richard's profile sheet about the character. What are your goals? What are your fears? How are we going to get there? How is it going to stop us? So I think, this is the first time for so many. So it's new, but for those of us that have had more experience, we can kind of see application for everything that Richard and Sheila shared with us today. It's kind of like when I'm dancing West Coast swing and then go to Argentine tango, completely different. They each can inform each other for me to learn something from. So I just offer that as something to think about. I would like to provide you with some worksheets in advance so that you can see them. If I have permission to email you, I will do so. And I'm happy to do that. I wasn't sure if everybody in today's group knows how to do the chat. I kept writing stuff in, hoping maybe somebody would respond. So I don't know, but it would be important for next week if everyone knew how to do chat. Please let us know if you don't. Thanks.
I don't know.
Just 1 second, Joanne, can you give us a 1 or 2 sentence indication about what you're going to speak about next week, please, so people can have an idea if they don't have the
Thank you.
in front of us?
I can't write fiction to save my life. I think Sheila is like a goddess to be able to do that. And it bothers me on Sheila's behalf when she says she's a lazy writer. She's not. She is driven by her story. Sometimes the story's at a red light. It doesn't mean she's lazy. When the green light goes on, she's full speed ahead. So often we are intimidated by other people's impression. You must get up at 9 o'clock and write for 2 hours. For those of us who are not plotters, pantsers, whatever, there are those of us who are driven by our story. We could go 36 hours and forget to go to the bathroom. So I want to do some nuts and bolts about how not to be intimidated by the writing process. 2, I want to tell you about how I overcame an obstacle in trying to write the story of young women who successfully defied the Nazis in German-occupied Europe. I was able to meet many of them. I wrote their stories in their voice, but I did it within a creative nonfiction framework, so it would be engaging to the reader rather than an encyclopedia. So the more I know about each of your goals, the more I can respond to your needs. I don't want to just go on and blather for an hour, to hear myself talk. So please, if you want me to be able to address your needs, email me with what you're trying to do, and I will design the hour to meet those needs.
That's great. That's great. And if you don't have Joanne's address, send it to myself or send it to Neil, and we'll get it to her. That's really great. Neil, it would really be terrific if you could just send out on a small email everybody's email address, if you could do that, and maybe put it in a group.
As long as everybody's okay with it. I don't like to share things without their permission. Everybody's okay?
Okay with that? Yes.
Yeah.
I think that would be great, instead of having to look it up all the time. It could be in a group and call you want to be a writer, and that would be really great. All right, I think I'm looking at the time, 11:30. Imagine that, right on.
Like little trained seals. We now know.
I want to thank Neil for recording it too, because I found it very helpful last time to be able to go back to the recording, because I missed a couple of things. My hearing is not so acute. That's all. Anyhow, thank you.
Okay,
You're welcome.
so we'll see you next week, same time, same station. And
Yep.
thank you to Sheila, thank you to Richard. Very, very chock full of information. And I will do my best to try to capsulize the traits that Richard spoke about, and the characteristics of women and men, and some of the ideas that Sheila had. I'll try to put it all into an email. And so you'll have that in front of you if you didn't take any notes. So have a great week.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you all.
Thank you.